everyone.
Thanks. Hi.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Wow. Thank you all for showing up at the end of it's been a pretty long day. Hopefully not for too many of you, but thanks
a
for
nice
showing
cool
up.
room to hang out in for the next 20
He's got his
minutes.
hoodie on. He's loving
It's a good
right
choice.
now.
It's a good choice.
Yes.
So I'll just kick it off. So my name is Hurd. I work for VML, which is owned by a company called WPP, which is a very large advertising network of advertisers, like advertising agencies. My agency is about 30,000 people. It's known as the largest creative company in the world. And that gives me access to work with a lot of brands. Over the past 4 years, I've worked with like Wendy's, Ford, Mazda, Coca-Cola, you name it. And whatever their immersive experiences are, I'm usually somewhere in the line of the creative flow of how that gets to be made in a campaign in some fashion or another. In addition to that, I'm also an AR instructor. I've been teaching AR for about 6 years, and I started off just literally teaching what I learned as I learned it on the way. I was originally just a 2D artist, and it's been actually very fulfilling. I come to these events, and a lot of people come up to me and say, hey, I know who you are. I watched some video of you 5 years ago, and now I have a totally different career. And I'm like, that's fulfilling. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And I'll pass it over to Lianne.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I am Lianne Barron. I am on the AR partnerships team at Meta. My title is a strategic partner manager, and what that essentially means is that I have the luxury of pairing really great creative people, brands, and partners, and I put them together to build out really compelling, immersive experiences. Been doing that for a little bit with Meta. It's been 3 years that I've been doing that now, and we came to know each other a little while ago.
Yeah.
About 5 years ago or so.
Long time ago. Yeah.
Because we were in a space of being creators and being creative. And what we want to talk to you about today is over the course of this time that we've known each other and been in this space, there are a lot of things that are shifting and changing. And it's easy for the enthusiasm for the work that we're doing to kind of die out. So how do we stay fulfilled? What are the things that we're bringing to the conversations, to the work that we're doing? How do we do the daily grind, but do so in a way that's really quite fulfilling in all aspects of the work that we're doing? So, we have a history. So if you look at our little photo album here, these are moments over the last 5 years. We met, as I said, in the creator community back in 2019 when we were building effects for the IG beta. Where Spark AR was kind of our delivery method of choice. And we've had the opportunity, you see some familiar faces of folks that are actually in the audience right now. And we've spent time, during this process, really kind of figuring out, like I said, what are the things that drive us? So these are a couple of really fulfilled faces, and we want to talk a little bit about what we think is a bit of a formula if you're finding that you're losing that enthusiasm or momentum.
Yeah. Go for it.
Yeah, he's like, well, you're on a roll.
I know, you're on a roll. You're good.
And another couple faces here. So we actually, thankfully, we have the opportunity as well to continue on with motivating and really engaging experiences. This is 3 years of Coachella. Luke and I had the opportunity to work on 2022, 2023, and just 2024. And in doing so, what we're taking is something that we talked about actually here at AWE last year, which is having a really strong narrative through the work that you're doing. That was a topic that we spoke to last year, and it's something that we're going to speak to as well this year, because strong narrative, which I'm going to explain in a few minutes from my perspective and from Luke's perspective, what that actually means, is the driving factor behind not just the stories that we're telling, but how we find fulfillment. So we think that there are actually kind of 3 key components to finding that fulfillment, and the first thing, as I mentioned, is starting with the narrative.
Or at least identifying a lack of it. If you're feeling like a little lost, it's easy to use. It's easy to figure out where it might be lost.
Yeah, exactly. So, and this will help you kind of like to fill that gap. So narrative for me can really be something that is executed through storytelling, but also through purpose. So, that whole thing that you hear people say all the time, finding your why. It's absolutely necessary when you're coming into space, because you don't necessarily always have that enthusiasm, right? But if you are waking up and some days it's kind of the grind is slow, but you have that thing, that passion point that kind of North Star that you're always working towards, that will drive the storytelling, that will drive the narrative. Your why, per se, is the thing that's always going to be kind of within that scope of the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
So this one's a personal piece for me. I have a very, very important.
Sorry.
Oh, where are you going,
I gotta
Hurd?
go back.
Okay. So we're going to talk about my point of passion, something that was deeply meaningful to me, that I built out a couple of years ago when Doja Cat was working with one of our teams at Meta, and they were building an interactive website with Girls Who Code. It was an initiative where girls were taught how to build a dynamic website. You could go to that website, you could actually change the color on the actual browser, and it would change the experience. And so they came to me and they said, Lianne, can you pair us with a creator that might be able to build an experience to pair with this woman release for Doja Cat? And I kind of paused for a second. I'm like, isn't that odd that they would come and ask me to pair a creator with this group of maybe possibly 500,000 women that have the opportunity to learn and build and code themselves and build AR experiences. So they said, okay, that's great and all, who's gonna teach them? Well, I said, I'll do that. So the reason that I took it on myself is because I think it's incredibly important that women, young girls, have the opportunity to learn how to leverage tech, how to have a voice in this space, how to code. Because a few years ago, I got out of a situation where I don't think I would have had the confidence to step away from it if I didn't have that baseline, if I didn't have the courage to say, yeah, I'm gonna find myself in a decent career somewhere because I have the capacity to code. And I know that these emerging tech industries are things that I'm going to be able to leverage and build a whole new foundation for myself. So given that, I'm like, I'm gonna teach these girls how to code, how to do the AR effect. We launched the Doja Cat effect that is showcased here at Coachella 2022. I had a cohort of 6 girls that participated in that. They were absolutely thrilled that they were able to build this effect for Doja. It was shown on stage at Coachella. And when they came back to me, RCA said, we have a whole roster of people on our list of strong women lead roles that would love to partner with Girls Who Code and continue this and build it into a full year program. So that's what we did. And these girls, different cohorts, worked with Lotto, they worked with the Chadwick Boseman Foundation, they worked with Pink, and we closed it out with Becky G, a Latina artist, with a creative that we have. She's not, I don't think she's here, but she's in the area, Nadia Temez, and her studio, Synergy Studio. And that effect was launched at Coachella 2023, so full circle moment. And there are so many points of fulfillment through all of that. And you can hear from my passion, and I'm sure if you were to speak to any of the artists and the girls who are participating in this program, that it goes beyond just the content, the assets, the production of that. Mm-hmm. But because they're bringing in their passion point, their why, and that we all have done this together, that it was an incredibly fulfilling program that I'm very, very proud, and I'm happy to share with you all. But just as a point of inspiration, hopefully, that you understand that it can go so much more beyond just the content and just doing the work, and that if you bring that note of passion and purpose to it, that it gives it a whole other level. So.
And on that note, content.
Yeah.
So thinking about the way that you're delivering these things is important. And when you're thinking about fulfillment, content matters in an odd way. And so what I mean by that is, in the case of Lianne, the content that came through with Doja Cat was kind of predefined in a way. There was already a narrative. There was already a story there with Girls Who Code. Doja Cat has her own narrative that she's trying to tell as well, that they're trying to kind of channel through what they're building. So when it comes to content, the hard part about content is that when you work with brands, they usually have assets and things to work with, and you have the ability to kind of play around in a playground. The first thing you might ask is like, hey, do you have style guides and colors, and what's your current ad campaign, just to get an idea of what you're gonna be possibly playing with. But when you don't have that, it's a struggle. And you feel like when you're kind of grinding away on that, it does feel a little unfulfilled. There's a way that you can kind of get in this mix and still be working with things and still feel like, I don't know that I'm necessarily tied to what I'm touching here. And if you follow me on social media, you might know that I do a lot with DeLorean time machines. So like pretty much everything I do is about the DeLorean time machine. I use this to test pretty much everything in existence. This is testing how many polygons I can put in an Apple Vision Pro, which is about 17 million in one scene, pretty wild. So just testing this stuff, that gives me the content to be able to find some fulfillment, because I am a child of the 80s. I grew up with Back to the Future. I want to have a DeLorean that I can sit in. So already I have something that I can play with, that I have content. I have something that's tangible. And when I do things like a hello world, I'm less tied to it. But when I put this in there and I want to figure out how do I open the doors, I start getting into scripting. I start figuring out how modeling works. I start figuring out materials. I start spreading things out. And that content piece, when you're finding a lack of fulfillment, is important, because a lot of times when we're working with brands, we're not tied to that. Somebody might be handing us assets. They might be doing this, and you always have to make money. I'm not saying you don't have to play with that stuff, but when you're doing this on your own and you're kind of like, man, what do I do tomorrow? Like, I've kind of feel like I'm just kind of grinding out ideas, and I don't really know where to go. It's good to always go back to something that's wholly unrelated to XR, wholly related to you, because you care about the thing you're touching. It could be working out. It could be Twilight. It could be Back to the Future. It doesn't really matter. It's just, what do you care about, and how do you channel that into something like this? And that gives you at least some content to leverage while you don't have content. So here's an interesting thing. So in September 22nd, 2023, I was working at VML and had two people reach out to me and say, hey, essentially Disney and Marvel want to partner with Coca-Cola. They want to do the same thing. We don't really have an idea. What do we do? So we threw around an idea of having some AR cans and how that worked, and we were like, how do we kind of get this idea how do we keep this idea alive? So literally early in the morning, this idea came to me about 8 o'clock, and at around 8:25 or so, I published this silly thing, just showing that we can track to a can, just to, again, just show something to Disney, the client, something, to build some inspiration. My secret kind of sauce, I'm a pretty prototypical person. I can throw things together pretty quickly. I like to hack things together. I'm not a perfectionist in that way. I literally forgot my belt, and I have a USB cable tied here, just to give that as an example. But what's interesting is that spun that idea from just a concept that a couple creatives talk about in an ad agency that usually hits a dud, because there's not a lot of information inside those walls to build inspiration. Say, hey, it doesn't take 25 people to bring this to life and put it in front of the client. I can do it in literally 20 minutes, sitting over here, myself, just one person. That leads to this, and here we are, April 8th. Now think about the timeline there. That's not that far. This is 50 countries. This is a global campaign with 50 different countries, 30 different Marvel characters. You put them in a scene together, and they can interact. It was much harder than I'm making it sound, but there's a way where you can leverage I woke up early in the morning to build that Thanos thing, because I was like, comic books? Sure. And I just sat up and was like, I'm going to build it. I know I can build it, and I know I can keep this idea alive and just try to keep pushing it through the door. So that's that content piece. There's something about me that made me want to wake up and put that on there, and that's actually a beer. Hilariously, I brought it out of my fridge. Here's the conversation we had. I was like, oh, blah, blah, blah. That's actually a beer, and they said, it's 11 a.m. Is everything okay? So the fulfillment I get out of this is I feel like having those ability to pull things that I care about from a content context, I'm able to push these things really quickly. Like if it was something that I didn't care about, if someone was like, oh, we want to make an AR effect about macaroni and cheese, sorry, Kraft, macaroni and cheese, I probably wouldn't have got out of bed and made a thing with a macaroni and cheese box. But because it's something that I care about, it's content that I can access, I was like, oh, I know I can find a Thanos model and track that thing to a can. I know that I can in 20 minutes, no big deal. So what that ends up being is like a grand idea. So just a couple people of us talking ends up with this whole campaign with Marvel and Coca-Cola. And we knew that we were going to do something with them, but the activator all came from just kind of pushing these little prototypical ideas along, having that content be part of me, and being able to turn it around in a quick manner. It doesn't have to be this. I don't mean to make it quite so like dude-ish, but anything is content. Anything you care about can be something that you can leverage in the space. So the last thing here is what's really important is communications or comms. So when you think about when you're doing all this stuff, let's say you have a great narrative. Let's say in the case of Coca-Cola, they give you something about superheroes. You have the content. You have some assets to work with. Now it comes to communications. How do I spread this out into the world? With brands, they spend a lot of money, and they spend a lot of ads. They don't just publish it on a website and hope that people stumble across it. They don't just make an effect and just let it live natively. They try to they know how awareness works. So to build awareness, they spend money. That's really great for brands. And what's interesting about brands is they're kind of like the Medici family, right? So Leonardo da Vinci was not out there painting all that stuff himself. He was funded by people who were giving him the narrative and the content to go paint. And he knew how to paint skin. He knew how to lay base layers of blue and flesh tones on top to make it look real. So like he was able to leverage his skills, but use that family and their money to paint these things and bring creations to life and have his own flavor in it. So that's how I see brands, as gross as that sounds, but they are like the Medici family. I mean, they do activate very grand ideas on a very large scale that a lot of people can't. But what do you do when you're not a brand? You don't have a lot of money. So what I try to do, and this is a silly hack, but I want to share it because I feel like it's somewhat effective. So if you think about the way that brands work, they're buying things called media dollars. They're putting money to get eyes on things. So if you can find ways that media dollars are already being spent and leverage that to tell your story, you don't have to spend money on that. There are already people talking about something. So if you can take your XR expertise, whether that be development, modeling, the whole thing, interface design, whatever, if you can take that and leverage something that is already being talked about, then you can get free media dollars on the top of just your experiments of what you're building and publishing on LinkedIn and things like that. Mm-hmm. So just to show, this is 2023. This is what this is. Dead at the top, of course, not a surprise. But that's what most of the talks here are about right now. Snap's big announcement to Gen AI Studio. It's everywhere right now, and it's important that it is because we can't have AR without machine learning. It's impossible. So it's interesting to see this and say, well, of course this is on here. Of course this is on the hype cycle. But there's other things there too. And not all these things make it over. This isn't a magic Bible or anything. But Gartner is essentially, they go and they interview advertising agencies like mine. They interview people like me. I've been interviewed by them multiple times. And they essentially ask, what are brands asking you? What are agencies asking you? What are they all sharing with each other? What do they see out there that they're trying to get you guys to look at? And then they kind of compile it all and say, what's everybody talking about right now in these different areas? They've been doing this for about 20 years. It's not an exact science, but there's some interesting things. So like if we go back to 2022, what were we all talking about last year at AWE? Last year, it was NFTs, decentralized identities, Web3. That was the whole thing. So, and I'm not saying that there's anything dead about this. I'm just saying that there are ways, and I'm not saying necessarily that you use this to grift an idea. I'm saying that there are media dollars being spent in these areas. If you can leverage it in some of your experiments and some of your ideas, there are free media dollars for grabs because there's people publishing stuff about this. And if you can leverage your skill sets in there, there's an easy way to get on that kind of train and get some exposure to what you're doing. So
let me just jump on that too. And just again, context for those of you that maybe are in that rut too, right? And I think you're kind of covering that in that this is really a great kind of point and a checkpoint where you can really kind of go back and say, I'm feeling a little bit low. Yeah. If it's, again, I'll take it back to personal projects because inspiration can sometimes fall out flat, or even if it's a space of overwhelm where there's just too much information. Sometimes it's as well that an area is saturated, oversaturated. There are too many voices, there are too many things that are being produced in a space, and you're just not getting kind of the coverage, the comms coverage that you would want.
Totally.
Because it's already had so many conversation pieces added to that. Maybe this is a great way to kind of spark a new concept or thought by jumping back into the upswing of the hype cycles and kind of taking something that resonates with you, play with it. You add in your narrative, you add in your story, right, that thing that drives you, and then you build out the content, and suddenly you have
the whole thing.
The triangle of fulfillment.
That's right. So. I mean, and the idea here really is saying like, the brand, the people you're working with might provide the narrative and the content and the comms. They might be providing all that. And you can work and make a living and do that and feel fulfilled, don't get me wrong. But if there's an area that you're feeling fulfilled in, it's good to just kind of check and say, is what I'm building not getting out into the world and people don't know about it? Is it a comms problem? I feel like I'm working really hard and no one's seeing my stuff. I'm not even getting a negative response. I'm getting no response. Yeah. That means there's probably a comms thing that you need to work on, or just think about it in that context anyway. Same with content. Maybe the content just isn't resonating. And what that means doesn't mean that you have to adjust to people, but it just means like there's a way, there's a, whatever you're into, there's a group out there who's into it too. Yeah. So there's ways for you to kind of find your people in the space and also in the XR world and kind of get that Venn diagram together. So again, this isn't perfect, but it's fun to kind of think about as we have been answering these questions over the years, which literally have ranged from what do you do to find inspiration when you don't have anything to work on to like, how do I get clients kind of a thing, but more business questions. It does come down to like, well, what are you doing yourself? Like, how do you apply yourself in this? So I can build a full project and supply all this stuff myself. I can supply my own narrative, my own content, my own comms, or figure out a way to hijack some comms anyway. And by the way, that's not the only hype cycle. There's all kinds of stuff out there. I was just showing that as an example to say there's stuff out there that show trends, and there's an easy way to identify trends in which media dollars are being spent, in which you can also leverage that for free. So I think that pretty much wraps it up. Yeah.
I think so. And again, it's not just about the hype cycle as well, just to jump on that just for another second. It's the community that you're in.
Yeah.
And it's also as you're kind of observing what's happening in community, I think a lot of us who have been riding these waves, there's really an unscripted intuition almost of the things that light you up. And I'm gonna give y'all permission, like follow that gut, and you know it, right? You know a lot of people as they're going through the thing that they were just like, I just had a feeling about this. That's also an unspoken point of signal that I highly encourage all of you to go ahead and explore as well, along with the hype cycle and a lot of the data-driven stuff. But you put it all together, and hopefully from this, there's a little bit of inspiration that will drive you all to find a bit more fulfillment in the work that you're doing.
Hopefully.
In this crazy changing world of XR.
Thanks for sweating in here with us.
Yeah, we
appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.